Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is going to be a really great session. I can feel it coming because we've been reading the comments from our super audience already, and we're expecting many, many more people. Now, if you can see my screen, you'll see that this session is a SecureIT initiative session on Mind Your Language. Wow, mind your language? What do we mean by that? Well, it's not what we mean so much as what Sarah, our great speaker, Sarah Armstrong-Smith means. She is actually the Chief Security Advisor at Microsoft, and she works with strategic customers across Europe to help them to evolve security strategy to support digital transformation and cloud adoption. Now, my name is Darling. I'm chairman of BCS London Central Branch and North London Branch. I am nothing to do with West Yorkshire Branch, but I know a man who is, and he's on this webinar now. He will be manning the questions panel, and he's labeled as North Yorks there, but his name is actually Dan. So there's a secret for you. But this isn't about us. It's about language, and it's about Sarah. Sarah has been voted one of the most influential women in UK tech, and she's also one of the most influential and inspiring women in cybersecurity. Well, I can vouch for that because this is actually the fourth session that Sarah is doing for us. That's to say North London and Central London branches. And Sarah, please close your ears. I think she's great. And this session is going to be super too. She's also passionate about working with SMEs, and she serves as a non-exec director and board advisor to help their tech journeys. He does a huge amount of things, and we're really delighted that Sarah is also now an integral part of the BCS because she's joined us as a fellow of the BCS. So welcome, Sarah Armstrong-Smith, FBCS. Over to you.
Wow, thank you. No pressure then. I'm just going to do my slide sharing, if you don't mind waiting just a minute while I get myself prepared. This is always the fun part, isn't it? Now I'm going to hope and pray everyone can see my screen, and you should see lots of smiley faces at you. So I'm really delighted to be with you again. As Darlam said, he's actually conned me into doing 4 of these so far. But no, it's a real pleasure, and this is a real interesting subject that I'm going to be talking about today, and it's all about language. And it's actually a tale of 2 halves. So when I talk about language, some of it is about the actual written words. Some of it is about how we portray language, if it's negative or is it positive, but also how language is used in technology and coding. And then I'm going to be touching into artificial intelligence as well, and how all these things interplay with each other. I'm going to start with a piece of work that I actually did most recently with UK Finance and EY, and how this came to be. Now, we actually published this report in July of this year, but the work that went into this actually started last year, and it all came about as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement. That was kind of mid of summer last year, and it really brought to the forefront just some of the challenges with regards to race and ethnicity. So you might be thinking about, well, why is this relevant to finance, and why technology and cybersecurity in particular? Well, at the same time, a lot of the British banking institutions have been around for maybe hundreds of years, and they've had issues potentially with being linked to funding or profiting from slavery. And it really kind of brought this to the forefront, and that's why we focus specifically on this paper in relation to youth financial services. And UK Finance actually asked for a number of companies to come together to help with this paper. And Microsoft and EY partnered on this and co-authored it. But the interesting thing really was when we started to talk, we had interviews, we did surveys. This went way beyond just racial and ethnicity. It really brought to the forefront just how important language is and how it's been so embedded. And it really started to come into, you know, sexual orientation, disabilities, accessibility, but also, again, why cybersecurity and why technology in particular was this, and it wasn't about calling out this specific sector per se, but it was really that acknowledgement that technology is embedded into everything that we're doing and all the time. And it's really brought this to the forefront with the global pandemic and that real shift and acceleration to the cloud. And arguably we were already on this journey, but it's just accelerated. And cybersecurity is part of that. Again, it's kind of embedded into everything. But cybersecurity in particular has often been portrayed as quite a negative, quite a niche area. It's often associated with bad things, such as cybercrime, it's fraud. You know, and when you kind of see the security operations, they tend to be this tucked away area, very specialist, lots of jargon, lots of different difficult language that's really hard for people to grasp and get hold of. So that's really why we had this link between finance, technology, and cybersecurity. But really, when we're thinking about language, it was really important for us to understand context and really how language has evolved. And really, it's really understanding when we're utilizing certain words, it's really understanding how they're being utilized and how when we put certain words together, it changes. So white and black on their own are just colors. You know, they're not negative, they're not trying to portray anything in particular. The challenge comes when we try to actually associate these colours in different ways. They're really some of the challenges of when we associate white as being something good or positive and black as being something that's negative. You can kind of see the context of this word and language changes. And just to kind of some examples there is kind of whitelist and blacklist, which we know a lot with regards to cybersecurity. And this is really about things that we allow, things that we deny. And the whitelist is the allow, the blacklist is really associated with all of those negative things that we don't want. And I really just kind of extrapolated from there. And I'm going to go into a little bit with regards to context and really what we're trying to do. Now, I really, if you've heard me speak before, you know that human element of security is so important to me, particularly the language that we utilize. And this came up quite a lot with regards to how we portray cybersecurity. And one of my pet hates is actually that we talk about people as being the weakest link. And also that we portray potentially some of our users as being stupid. And you only have to look at these images really, when we talk about human error and we talk about the weakest link, just how these kind of images are portrayed. It's almost kind of saying, does it really matter what we do from a technology process perspective? It's always the people, and there's always a Dave. And I think that's really bad, but just to kind of like take that to the next level, really. We've also have a bad habit of referring to people as repeat offenders. Again, really in the context of cybersecurity. And we have to think about when we're having cyber attacks, really who are the criminals here? Are they really our people? When we call them repeat offenders, we are actually criminalizing what they're doing and how they're doing it. And we're actually portraying this really negative image and it's not really conducive to getting people interested in cybersecurity. And we kind of see a lot of these things now, again, stupid users, these people, how many times have we told them they click in the link? They're giving away their credentials, they're leaving their assets on trains, they keep holding the door open for people, they keep making changes and not verifying. But actually, it's not the people that's the problem. It's the process that goes behind it and the technology. So there's just some examples there that we've just kind of really brings to the forefront. Again, not some of the words, some of the language that we're utilizing in this context. But it's not just that. It's actually when we then think about some of the visual cues that we then associate with our language. And then here's a really good example. Now, I just, if you Google, or should I say Bing Microsoft, cyber criminals. Look what returns. Lots of pictures of people in hoodies. And this is just extrapolates. Now, when we're thinking about how this negative portrayal, and when you actually have a look at some of these pictures, you'll notice something else about these images as well. More often than not, they're very often portrayed as young white men. So not just people in hoodies, they're also young white men. So do we there take from that young white men are cyber criminals? No. We shouldn't, but this is how the visual cues start to come to life. And a lot of this comes down to metadata. It's in advertising. It's in every time we actually portray, what does a cyber criminal look like? Well, it looks like this. And we know that's not the case at all. So not only have we got to think about the words, we've got to think about the language you're utilizing, but also these visual cues as well. And I'm going to come back to this when I talk about that kind of how these biases are really coming to the forefront when we're thinking about coding and artificial intelligence and some of the ethical dilemmas around that. So why change? Why now? Now, some people will say this is pandering. It's all political correctness gone wrong. Now, we accept that may be the case, and it's something that we had dilemmas around and we debated a lot. But actually, it's more than just doing the right thing. There are very clear social and business benefits to making changes. And actually, we had a really great quote from Rickle Rathie, who's the CEO of the Financial Conduct Authority. And when we're thinking about, who do we represent in society, when we're different businesses, who are our consumers, who are our partners, who are we trying to sell to? It's a multiple different demographics, at different ages, different cultures. So we really have to be thinking about, if we're not actually providing services in the right way, and we're not thinking about our biases and blind spots, how can we pretend to be able to provide the services in the right way to these people? So I find that just a really great statement, and I think it was a really good way of demonstrating that this goes way beyond what we might think about in terms of diversity and inclusion. And again, as we're kind of coming out the other side of the pandemic, lots of companies are really rethinking their business models. They're reinventing themselves. They're turning themselves into technology or software companies. And it's really that opportunity that we have about building a right culture that really considers that wider society, but also those wider benefits to the bottom line. But it's also about our people as well. Now, we know, again, we have a big skills gap dependent on who you talk to and what reports that you have, but that really is the case. So if we keep portraying technology and cybersecurity as this negative area, how do we attract people in? But it's not just attracting them in, we also have to get them to stay as well. So it's our employees, it's our customers, it's our partners. And we really have to be cognizant about why we are doing certain things. And at the end of the day, it's all about people. It's all about serving people in terms of the technology and the users of the technology. I think sometimes we forget that the people element is front and center to everything that we're doing and every decision that we're making. So I'm not expecting to read all of this, but this is where I just wanted to kind of bring to the forefront and the dilemmas really with regards to, if you're thinking about certain words, and I'm going to be showing you some examples of these and the context of these, it's really kind of, again, thinking about, it's not necessarily a universal change. It is not as easy to say you just swap this word with that one. So we really acknowledge that that evolution of language is really key, as the same way as we're evolution of technology and those kind of social values and norms. Now, we kind of go back a few years ago, and it would have been quite unheard of, let's say, to hear a lot of profanities in the workplace or even on the television, but we're seeing that more and more and more. It's just becoming more socially acceptable. And I think this is how we have to consider that maybe words that we utilize and just took for granted, didn't really give it a second thought previously. Maybe we've got to rethink some of these again as people's reality and the use of these language changes. But again, as we have to think about context and how we're utilizing those words. And within we also have to consider what language, what physical language are actually utilizing. So when we were putting this report together, we were looking at it from the perspective of the English language and the English meaning of the word. Now, this is quite important because actually when you translate it from English to another language or from another language into English, the meaning of the word, the context of that word potentially changes, potentially with different countries. So even when we're talking about the English language, our view of the language might be different in the UK or Australia or America. So they're all English speaking countries. But we know there's variances with regards to the use of language and what different people may consider offensive or not. And again, thinking of different countries with regards to that international audience, that we've just kind of picked on a number of different words. There will be different words, there will be different terms. Now, I've included here a case study from Microsoft. And as I say, I'm not expecting you to read all of this, but I will be sharing all of the links to the documents and some of the case studies and articles that I'm going to be referring to. So this is being recorded for YouTube, and I'll be making sure that you've got the link so you can refer to these. Now, actually, changing of language was something that Microsoft started actually way back in 2014. So it's been something that Microsoft has been very cognizant about, but it really kind of accelerated in 2018 when Microsoft acquired GitHub. Now, GitHub is utilized by a number of software developers or technologists, and we have over 65 million developers. This is really bringing to the forefront about that coding of language, how we utilize computer language, and how those biases are starting to come through. And we had this kind of, one of the key areas that we focused on again was really about this master on its own or slave on its own is not necessarily a negative thing. When they're put together, it assumes some kind of hierarchy. And the way that this is utilized in databases or in technology normally infers some kind of primary or secondary relationship. And it was this context that really changed the emphasis in this particular area. So I just wanted to kind of bring that to the forefront as well, really, that it's that context when you put certain words together that it changes the emphasis. And we have to think about, what are we actually inferring when we kind of put these different words together, or even words on their own. So we've made a lot of changes already with regards to how we utilize some of these words. We're sharing a lot of information and helping a number of different companies, but we're also liaising with lots of different companies as well in terms of how they can utilize the same kind of principles. So we've already been partnering with with IBM, Intel, and VMware as just a number of companies. But it kind of goes beyond that, so actually National Cybersecurity Centre, they actually started making some changes again last year. And I'm not expecting you to read all of this, but it just kind of made the point again with kind of that changes in whitelisting, blacklisting, and why this was a good thing to do. But the bit I really wanted to call out was not the fact necessarily that they've already started to make some of these changes, but the last line I felt was really important, but it really made a really brave statement. And when we're talking about, is this political correctness, gone wrong? And I love this comment. It was from the Ian Levy, who is the technical director, and it's kind of a last point really. If you're thinking about getting in touch, saying this is political correctness gone mad, don't bother. Now, I think that just really puts out a very, very positive statement with regards to why they think this is a good thing to do. And as I sort of said, it goes way beyond that kind of diversity and inclusion and has into that social area as well. But it's not just there. So actually NIST, as the National Institute for Standards and Technology in the US, and now a lot of our customers, our cloud customers, adopt NIST for their technology standards, particularly with regards to cloud adoption. And they actually published in June of this year a series of publications with regards to, again, this use of inclusive language and things to think about. And again, they kind of highlighted that to try to avoid utilizing black when you're being negative or white to mean positive. But again, some other examples that we've touched on, that master slave. But again, with that accessibility, when we talk about being dummies or those type of things, and again, that kind of right and left to be bad or abnormal. That kind of sexual element has come in as well with regards to that male-female connected. They've also made a few other changes within the kind of the context of language and how we name inanimate objects as well. So within the paper itself, we actually proposed a number of different alternatives. And we try to group some of these together. Now, some of these we've talked about with whitelist, blacklist, master slave, for example. Because the paper was then looking at financial services, we brought into the black market. We also had dilemmas about the dark web. Again, that's utilised in a cybersecurity context. It's normally about this is where you buy bad information. It's where you go underground, in essence, for the cyber criminal network. So again, it's that black, it's that dark is bad. When we get into that kind of gender and orientation, we really kind of, again, thinking about, we have that kind of grandfather, father, son relationship where the grandfather is old, it's legacy. And the son is the new, it's the bright, and it was that kind of that those negative type of things. And then again, with penetration testing, again, these could be quite considered offensive to some people. And it was just really to try and get people to think about things in a different way. And that accessibility, again, when we refer to sanity check, dummy guides, and those type of things, it kind of inferring. Again, that kind of people are stupid, those type of things. It's really portraying the wrong message. And then we dropped down into kind of that use of military criminal terms that we've come to look at from a cybersecurity perspective. And again, it's use of repeat offenders, kill chain, war games, detonation chambers. All of these things really don't help the cause. When we're trying to think about just how do we improve what we're trying to do. Now, we were just looking at this again. You might kind of say, why have you chosen multiples? Why haven't you just said one? And I think this is important when we were talking about your organization, how the words are utilized, but also making sure that the word and the languages fit what you're trying to do and what you're trying to portray. So it wasn't kind of saying thou must use this word and this word only. It's really about some suggested alternatives. You might have others that fit your organization. Now, there's another initiative called the Inclusive Naming Initiative. Now, this is a group of technology companies, again, that are represented here, that have come together, and it's really about, again, can the technology industry or come together and think about technology terms in particular, and things which really should be replaced immediately. They had these kind of 3 tiers. Tier 1, replace immediately. Tier 2, strongly consider. And a Tier 3, recommend. And again, you've got a Tier 1, is that whitelist, blacklist, master, slave that we talked about. But they've also introduced that abortion as well, that we come to think about with regards to how we terminate sessions. Now, they did make the point as well that we should also not call it kill. Now, the interesting thing is anyone can actually join this organisation. But it's really just an open forum to have the discussions, have the debate, and I kind of think about some of these words, the context of these words, and how some of these the things should be changing. But it's not just that. So we wanted to think about the language. How do we empower people? So we didn't want this to just be down to the organisations themselves with regards to having to change policy, having to dictate some of these things. Actually, on a personal level, people should feel empowered to be able to do those sense checks, to do those different things themselves. Now, a lot of customers will utilize Microsoft Word or Microsoft Office in a number of their services, and you'll be used to seeing things which regards to checking of grammar, checking of spelling. Now, we've introduced Microsoft Editor, which actually it builds upon that. Now, what you'll see is not only is there about spelling and grammar, but it also looks at your clarity. Are you concise? Is it inclusive? Is the punctuation right? And you see in this particular example, so this is actually referring back to that previous use case. So this is the Word version of that. And this is where we were sense checking. What do these things do? Now, as you can see, when you click into it, it kind of tells you, why whitelist might be considered biased and why blacklist might be considered biased as well. It gives you some alternatives. And now people can choose to ignore it. They can choose to use a different word altogether. But the interesting thing in here then is actually you've got the settings, and what you can see is you can actually have the tick boxes which enable you to say what kind of biases, what level of inclusivity do I want to be checking for. And it's not just with regards to language. Again, when we're thinking about accessibility, when we're thinking about the users and the readers of some of the documentation, we also have the ability to dictate. So this is a read aloud text. We might also challenge in PowerPoint with regards to the use of different fonts, different colors. Again, is this accessible? Can people read it? Do you need to put captions onto pictures and those type of things? So this is just really where we're thinking about how do we actually enable people to be able to make these choices and decisions themselves without really thinking about, are they reliant on what the company's view of the world is? And we just thought this was really nice. So any office documents, and also email, this function is in as well. And you can see it's really easy. It's literally just turning the editor button on. And there's just a number of different options which are available to people. So then we want to kind of think about, okay, so we're empowering our people, we're empowering users to be able to look at that. But again, if we think about this from a technology perspective, now when we're designing for our software, and operating systems like Word and Office, it's actually then thinking about the inclusive design principles, designing for accessibility, and recognizing some of the things that we have to do and making sure that it's we're elevating up. So we're not discriminating against different people, but we recognize that there may be specific areas that we need to focus on. with regards to helping people to design software or design capabilities. And this even goes into advertising, goes into a number of different areas. It's not just unique to software development, but it really kind of goes across a lot of those things. With regards to making sure that we're always being inclusive and thinking about that level of accessibility. And that's really about the crux of it with regards to embracing that diversity, building that inclusive experience for everyone. And it's really about bringing technology to the forefront of everything that we're doing. We don't want to exclude people from their ability to utilize technology or utilize the technology in a way that's going to be right for them. We're thinking about all of these things combined. But we're also cognizant that, people sometimes, companies are at different stages of their journey. Some of them, it might be quite mature. Some of them might be starting out. And arguably, this can be quite an emotive subject with regards to, looking at language and how do you kind of have these conversations. So within the report that we did, we actually kind of came up with 4 key areas. So one of it was around acknowledging those technical changes, looking at where there are already options available. So whether you can look at what's going in Microsoft or GitHub, those technology companies, or any of those things where that language is already being considered, and can you consider adopting some of those words, but also look at, again, the biases, those unconscious biases that are slipping in to those visual cues, the coding, our algorithms, and I'm going to be coming back to that, as I say. Now, the culture part is really important. I mean, sometimes you feel like you're pushing uphill. Who's responsible for this? Is it a HR thing? Is it a technology thing? Well, it's really about the business, but it needs to be led from a top down. And we need to make sure that our business leadership are really setting those right principles from the outset, and that they have, from a company perspective, they're really thinking about how do we build this inclusive culture. That can be from mentorship, sponsorship, allyship initiatives. But also we want to be encouraging all of our employees to be involved in the conversation, to have an open dialogue and to call out or have these conversations as well. But also we don't want to chastise people, but people are still going to make mistakes. And also we got to the point where if people are stuck with regards to, am I doing the right thing? Am I saying the right thing? I don't know. We want them to just still feel like they're empowered. We want to still feel that they're not going to get told off for utilizing the wrong language. As we said, it's evolution, but it's also that continuous improvement. As we said, as that evolution, as things start to change, it's that constant review of different policies and also different processes as well. So we come up with this kind of 12 step to success program, and it's very, very simple with regards to looking at the different levels of maturity. Where are you? Where can you start? And some of this we've spoken about with regards to reviewing current language used in technology and cyber, anything which might be considered as non-inclusive, getting that leadership support, particularly when we're talking about words that are very specific to technology and cyber. Can we make those changes ourselves without having to kind of get the wider business buy-in per se? And there are going to be different words and different things that sit outside the technology environment. Then I'm thinking about how do we engage that wider diversity inclusion in HR into the conversation, agreeing what these kind of alternatives might look like, having the business sponsorship, but also then, as we touched on, considering cultural alignment, engaging with employees, approval of potentially a number of different alternative words, how we're going to communicate this, and then instigating and maintaining that responsibility. Now, industry has also taken it upon themselves to do some really positive action. So this is actually Lloyds Bank. So they were involved in the writing and contributing to the paper. And they actually published a blog earlier this month, and it was really talking about what changes they've made and how important it is for them from a societal perspective, about how they make sure that they're doing not just the right thing, but they're really considering. And I really love this idea that they come up with, which is the 3 principles of respect. And this comes from Paul Vincent, who's the head of IT security. And he was just sort of saying, think before you speak, and really consider some of the phrases and how they could be misconstrued by different audiences. But this do not be quick to assume malice, I think is really important. So, be mindful of the fact that people have the right intent. They don't necessarily know or mean to be offensive when they're utilizing some of this language, because that language is just built into so much of what we do on a day-to-day basis. But again, it's about just letting people be mindful, have the conversation, but also be quick to apologize as well. So if you have inadvertently caused some offense in some way, and that's been highlighted to you, just make sure that you've apologized and you've kind of acknowledged some of these things. So I thought it was just really nice sort of principles, if you like, with regards to some of the things that they were talking about. And now I kind of broke the scene a little bit with regards to, I wanted to provide some context with regards to really what's coming next. And this was that kind of acknowledgement, as we sort of said, with regards to when we're building this advanced technology, particularly when we're thinking about artificial intelligence. Now, our view of the world is we're trying to get AI to mimic humans as much as possible. Now that means it comes with all of the things we've just talked about. So humans are humans. They're going to make mistakes, but also these biases, these unconscious biases that we've talked about, the language, the coding, the visual cues, all of these things kind of are slipping through into the designing and kind of what the outputs of some of the issues that we're seeing with regards to responsible AI. And this is kind of where I'm going to be talking to and focusing in on. But why do we need to have responsible AI? Well, I think a part of this just is that acknowledgement with regards to the advancements in technology. Now, I think it's fair to say that the advances in technology are moving at such a fast pace that arguably we can't keep up with what's going on. Regulations take too long as well. So we've got to be thinking about, as much as we have the ability to do a lot of these things with innovative and advanced technology, it really is cumbersome on us to slow it down and to make sure that we've considered the ethical and social dilemmas that are kind of appearing into some of the things I'm going to be talking about. And I'll reflect on some of this as well. But the interesting thing, as we said, is that if we want computers to behave like people and to make decisions as if they are people, how is that actually going to impact the lives of real people as well? Now, this is the bit that is kind of giving a lot of people dilemmas with regards to how do we get control? And we're already seeing these biases in machine learning algorithms and how they're impacting people in quite a significant way. And it's that I'm going to be talking about. But it's that what makes AI a reality. And when we're talking about AI, I mean, really what we're talking about at the moment is the machine learning capability. It's that coding that we've put in and to look for patterns, for this kind of, to make these decisions based on some of the patterns, based on information. Now we know that actually the more information we have, arguably the better the outcome. But also we've got to be thinking about where's this data coming from as well, and can we trust the quality of that data? Because rubbish in, rubbish out. So we've got huge amounts of data, but we've also got huge computational power, particularly when we're talking about utilizing the cloud to run some of these huge computer analytics, to do this insights, to do all of these different things. And we're just increasing the volume of data exponentially. And it's kind of, so when we're talking about the use of some of this AI, it's taking it to the next level. When we're talking about that cognitive intelligence, where we're actually getting the computer itself to make decisions, arguably that's with or without humans. And we're going to be talking about why the human layer in this is so important. Now, the interesting thing really, when we're talking about what's the debate that's been going on, and some of this we will reflect on as well, is some of this is regards to how this technology is being utilized. And so some of this is regards to facial recognition. It's about fairness. We're seeing deep fakes. It's really questioning human rights, the issues of consent and privacy. How can we trust the algorithms, the lack of regulation and the lack of control? And all of these things are spiraling with regards to being cognizant of what's going on. And if we leave it to its own devices, how bad is it going to get? Now, the European Commission have really highlighted that we need trustworthy AI. So if we want people to be confident in this use of advanced technology and how it's going to help humans rather than hinder them, we've really got to have trust in the process, in the language, in the biases that we have, and making sure that we are really looking at this through with an open mind when we're thinking about some of the issues that we're going to be reflecting on. So in essence, from our approach, and I'm going to be talking about some of the responsible AI practices. So we recognize that big tech in particular has to kind of come together and be thinking about, as much as we've got the ability to have this computational power, to have these huge data analytic engines, to be investing in this AI and all the things that come with it. Without regulation, we need some code of conduct, and we need to make sure that we're bringing lots of different companies and different tech companies as well on this journey. And we're all kind of brought in to these principles. So this is not necessarily the world according to Microsoft, but it's one of the things that we have set up as a responsible AI practice. And it's kind of a few things to be thinking about. Is regards to what is the purpose of the AI? What is it doing? How does it augment the abilities of people? How does it have a positive impact on people and society? What is the technology capable of with regards to the tasks that we're asking it to do, potentially some of the decisions, and the impact of some of those decisions, but also that quality and that reliability that which is so important. And this reliability is nothing new. We're used to thinking about quality and reliability when we're building systems. And we know things go wrong. We know things have got errors in. We know we're constantly having to provide updates, for example. But it's then thinking about, we know these things are already there. But if we don't understand the impact of some of these things, and we just allow the system to do its own thing, then we just make the problem even worse because we lose control. So the 6 areas are about fairness, reliability and safety, privacy and security, inclusiveness, transparency and accountability. And as we go through, you'll be able to see why language plays and inclusivity plays such an important aspect in terms of what we're talking about. So let me start with fairness. So the AI systems should treat all people fairly in terms of being what we're doing and how we're doing it. Now, to give you an example, really what we're trying to do is understand the biases and how that bias can impact people, and when we're trying to detect and eliminate biases. Now, this is just a good example where we're thinking about facial recognition. Now, we know there's a lot of debate with regards to the use of facial recognition and what it's trying to achieve. So this is from 2018, and it was just that kind of acknowledgement that facial recognition works very well if you're a white male. It doesn't work too well if you're actually a white woman, or actually if you're a darker skinned male or female. So the facial recognition and capabilities and biases, and a lot of the algorithms, a lot of the training phases, we've got to be thinking about, and how is this a true representation of society? Because if we're training it on a specific subset of information and data, these biases kind of slip in with what we're trying to do. Now, this is a biases with regards to how we translate language. Now, what this is a translation of is Turkish into English. Now, Turkish have a special structure with regards to how they talk about the third person. Really they don't have a kind of a gender to it. So when we're thinking about that first person is you, your second is him, her, but also then the third person is they. So it's not only when they translate it, so this is not just Microsoft, this is also Google. When you translate it from one language to another, not only does it apply a gender, but if you notice something very biased about the gender as well. So you can see that the males are doctors and engineers, and the female is a nurse. And again, it's that kind of that association with regards to that translation of language, but also the biases in the translation, and how we then associate different roles to be different genders, whether intended to or not. And again, these are these kind of biases that tend to come through. So it gets quite interesting, doesn't it? So reliability and safety, we should be relying on regards to understanding the safety issues, the reliability, how we're designing software, understanding errors in software and how that can be utilized. Now, a big area of debate is with regards to autonomous vehicles and the use, and how reliable, how safe are they really? And I'm going to be touching into some of this. But the reliability and safety, again, requires huge amounts of data to determine that statistical analysis about how safe or unreliable something is. So you have to have deployed this multiple times across multiple different systems to understand that reliability. So the testing phase is so critical when we're thinking about how reliable is this system in different, and how does it perform under different scenarios. But also we know that this is so open to attack, and manipulating the algorithms, manipulating the data, and causing accidents when we kind of see some of these things. Now, the interesting thing when we're talking about autonomous vehicles is the kind of the research. It gets kind of interesting. How many lives and fatalities is acceptable when we're talking about the reliability of autonomous vehicles and systems? So you can kind of see if it's acceptable to have 190 crashes per 100 million miles, we might kind of be thinking, oh well, maybe we can introduce this kind of autonomous vehicles quicker. If we want to reduce that down to an acceptable level, we should be saying this is so unacceptable. We shouldn't be having these fatalities or crashes and those type of things. But there's a real pressure coming from government, through society. We want automation. We want autonomous systems. We want it now. So actually, you've got a trade-off. So it's a kind of like, if you want a system, you're going to have to accept it with all the flaws, all the issues that come in. We're going to have more accidents. We're going to have fatalities. And I think this is where we really do get into that ethical dilemma and debate about how much pressure society is putting onto us with regards to getting these technologies out there as quickly as possible, even with all of these flaws into place. So we've got to have that kind of happy medium. Now, we're not going to wait, no one's going to want to wait 500 years per se, but how do we extrapolate? How do we get more information, more data? How do we make sure that we get to a position where we do feel safe and secure? We're not going to get rid of everything 100%, and we know this through our own system designs and through existing systems, even through existing cars and vehicles that we have, and relying on a human element. But it is something to be cognizant about. So privacy and security in a key area of concern, and a lot of this comes down to not just the security of the information, the security of the products and services, but also the privacy as well. Now, privacy keeps coming up time and time again, particularly when we think about GDPR, that facial recognition, how data is being collected, the decisions that data is being made about you in the background without you even realizing it. So it's, again, it really brings to the forefront about the type of information that has been collected, has been analysed. What are they doing with it? Does that information need consent? And again, how can this information be utilised for good, but also for bad as well? So do we got to be thinking about, with this a huge volume of data, how do we anonymize out de-identification techniques that we're so familiar with when we're talking about privacy and security is so key to what we're talking about. And I just want to give you a few examples. Now, this is the iRobot, which you might see. So this is the little robots that go around. And they are creating digital maps, if you like, of your house or your, and they're trying to work out, you know, where everything is in the building, in your room. And they were trying to overlay a level of artificial intelligence over the top to give it commands to kind of, so you could actually remotely tell it to start cleaning the room or to go into different rooms and to do different things. Now, this relies on a lot of data. It's actually, it's not just, creating this digital map of your property. You can kind of see, on one hand, this looks like a really cool thing. It's really, it's lots of benefits to people with regards to what they're trying to do and how they're actually trying to bring that social element into the home. But you can also see the reverse of it. So if someone was able to access this system, they know all the schematics of your home, and they know what's in there. Potentially, dependent on the images that are being created, they might know exactly what kind of technology and what kind of services and other images that might be taken. So this is kind of just an example of some of that data mapping and images. Now, here's another example. Now, this is actually a fitness app. So this is Strava. And what they've created is based on all of the telemetry signals that are coming from your watch and the routes that you take. It's providing you with little hotspots. Now, the idea behind this is if you wanted to find a new area in your to run or to do biking, to take exercising, go, well, these look like popular spots. And you can see this heat map of the USA. But actually, again, when you think about how this information could be used for nefarious purposes, so the other image that you're seeing on the left is actually mapping of a US military base, which is supposed to be secret. But the US personnel, obviously, they run around the base for their exercising. They might have a specific route that they take. But actually, what it was showing is this hot spot, and it was actually outlining the whole of the base and where all the different roads were and those type of things. So actually, again, if you think about what might be seen as a positive from one perspective is actually a huge impact on the other with regards to how the same data is being utilized for different purposes. And again, questioning that pool of data. Can someone reverse engineer it? Particularly if they were trying to get access to a specific person and a specific route that person's taking when they're doing their exercise or they're doing these different things, and if they're on their own. And so you can just kind of see, when we're thinking about the use of these systems, we've got to think of it from two perspectives. We've got to think about it from the good and from the bad. So that privacy and controlling that data is so key to a lot of what we're talking about. So the fourth principle, and it's really a kind of key to what we're talking about, is that level of inclusiveness. Now, there are 1 billion people on the planet with disabilities. Now, arguably AI technologies and a lot of the capability are game changers for a lot of these people about having that accessibility, providing them with technology, providing them with new services, and just bringing technology into their home and into their life. It just opens up so many opportunities for them. But this is where the barriers come into play about that inclusive design and making sure that when we're thinking about the technology, we're thinking about the devices, how these things are utilized. Are we thinking about it as broad as possible from all of these different perspectives? Are we building trust into the context of what we're trying to do and how we're doing it? So just an example of this, of inclusiveness. Now this is a class action lawsuit that was actually filed a number of years ago. And this was in relation to the American Civil Liberties Union of Idaho, who represent adults with development disabilities. So normally a lot of these people have functional ages of about 8 years old and below, and they need a lot of medical care and assistance. And the aim and objective is to allow these people to live in their own homes or live with their families or live in communities and have a good life. So they're not having to live in care homes. And it's really kind of thinking about what do these people need in terms of that care and assistance. Now, the state of Idaho actually made a decision to drastically cut the level of assistance that was provided. And the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare, really, there was a challenge against this, and they refused to give up the algorithms that they'd utilized to come up with this cost-cutting exercise. They said they were trade secrets, and they would not disclose the algorithm or how they come up with the decision to cut down some of the money that was being provided to these people. So the American Civil Liberties Union obtained an injunction from the court to stop them utilizing this particular algorithm, but also to make the formula of the algorithm public and to be held to account with regards to the use of the algorithm, decisions that were being made, but also to review the fairness and inclusiveness of the algorithm as well. With regards to forcing companies or forcing a particular company to be open and transparent and to really consider the uses of the algorithm. And this is really kind of brought to the forefront about the decision making. How do we know, how do we stand behind the decisions that are being made, particularly when we are solely dependent on the output of an IT system? Now, this is why we need the human element to be part of this. So it could be they're parts of the information, a part of the decision is being made by a computer, but it cannot be the only decision that is being made or being relied upon. So underpinning those really is the foundational layers of transparency and accountability. So transparency, again, is about understanding how decisions are made and explaining it. Now, we were familiar with the Wizard of Oz and how the wizard was just making up all of these things in the background, and he destroyed the Oz's view of the world and how it all worked, because you just had this person in the background controlling everything. And it's that kind of principle, that kind of concept. Are we trying to fool people? And why are we trying to fool people into believing that there is not a system or a decision making that's happening in the background? So we've got to be transparent. We've got to be able to show where these technologies or these biases are potentially being utilized, and some of the unintended outcomes that we're really facing. Now, this is quite interesting. So you might be familiar again with this kind of transparency. Now, this was an AI system that was built to go against a game called Go. This is a Chinese game. It's been around for about 2,000 years, and it's an abstract strategy board game. So it's about 2 players, and it's all about being able to surround your opponent and be able to utilize strategy to be able to surround your component and to take over from them. Now, they use these little stones. So you've got white stones, black stones, and each player has its own color, and you move the stones around the board. It's very much like chess, I suppose, in a certain way, that you have the tactics and strategies about how you move, how you counteract the player. Now, this particular person was playing against the machine, and the machine did something very, very unusual. Now, it had learned a lot of different moves in a lot of different ways, and it played a specific move that most people just couldn't get their head round. So it was just called move 37. I won't try and tell you the ins and outs of the move, but this particular person could not understand the rationale for why they chose this maneuver. Now, for most people, they would have considered this a mistake. It wasn't not a normal maneuver, but the system actually chose this specific move, and this person just had to sat there and was trying to work it out, and in the end, they just had to kind of admit defeat. Because they just couldn't understand the strategy or why they applied that move. And I think to this day, they haven't really been able to work out why. But it was just like kind of all the information had been fed. And it was just kind of a strategic move. It was a move that had probably been utilized many, many years ago and had probably been moved out, but it made that move anyway. And as I said, from a transparency perspective, trying to figure out why it did what it did, it's just kind of brought into dilemmas that sometimes the system doesn't necessarily make a logical move that a human would anticipate. It makes its own move, depending on what it thinks is correct. So you can think again, when you're thinking about the move that comes next, this is not always what's going to happen. So that level of transparency, that understanding of that is really counterpart to what we're talking about. So another issue of transparency, this now comes into New Orleans Police Department. They would actually been utilising artificial intelligence, secretly actually utilising this technology to try and predict gang activity, and trying to predict what they were going to do. Now, they never told anybody they were utilising this technology. Now, it was all done secretively, and they were trying to see if they could extrapolate and understand different information that would show that this particular person had a higher propensity to commit crime. So they looked at criminal history, they looked at their social media, they looked at their background, they looked at their history of violence, whether they would become a victim. Lots of different information, and when they were trying to then arrest people or try to utilize this information and bring people to court, they never declared this system. So they declared a whole host of other evidence that they collected, of evidence, ballistics, informants, and all of this thing, but never told them that actually we would be utilizing AI to predict on this person, and that was why that person ultimately might have been arrested or followed in the first place or tagged. for monitoring of all of these type of things. So, and actually they're still utilising it. They've been utilising it since 2012. It's various different reiterations. So the company behind this, they call the tool a crime forecasting system. Now, again, when you're thinking about that transparency, how that data is utilised, how it's collected, the fact that you're not being transparent, you're not allowing people to counteract this when you're going to court. How unfair is it that this information is being utilized in this way? And again, how do people defend themselves if they don't know that this AI is actually being utilized against them? So the accountability, again, it really kind of brings to the forefront, if we're relying on systems, who ultimately, if it all goes wrong, who is accountable? Who should be held for account? And when we're thinking about putting this technology out there, and whether the reliability, the security, the privacy, according to who signs it off? So we've got to have these independent boards that are really kind of thinking about how do we make sure what we're doing is done in the right way and for the right reasons. So accountability really is then kind of thinking about when everything goes wrong, who's to blame? And again, we kind of got this autonomous vehicle thing that's come up again. Now, this kind of came to the forefront in 2018 when a self-driving Uber car struck and killed a pedestrian in Arizona. And it came to court, and it was really about should Uber itself be held accountable for the use of these vehicles? Now, it turned out a year later, Uber itself was actually exonerated from any criminal liability, and it really called into the account of the driver. So, although the car was driving itself and they were utilising capability that was built into Volvo, the person was still supposed to be in control. They were still supposed to be viewing and be able to take control of the car. But this person was not taking any notice of what was going on. And actually, they were saying he was actually watching, I think he was watching a TV program or watching his phone or something. So it kind of calls into, again, that liability, how much control, who is liable? Is it the vehicle manufacturer? Is it the company that utilizes it? Is it the person behind it? Is it the person behind the algorithms? So it just really brings in this level of accountability is so important, and it kind of keeps coming up in debates and various different lawsuits with regards to trying to understand liability, and insurance companies as well are really key to this, because if you did have an accident, who do you sue? Who do you get compensation from if you're a victim? And so there's a lot of debate that really goes into this particular area. So another level of accountability. So this is about, again, this is the UK. So this is the Home Office that had actually been collecting multiple different images. So they actually had 19 million different facial images that they collected and held on their police databases. And even though a lot of these people had not done anything wrong, they hadn't committed a crime, they held all this information anyway. And there was a lot of debate, requirements that this was unlawful. You should not be keeping this information. And it's almost a kind of the same debate that we see with regards to like facial recognition, holding DNA, and a lot of these things. And their argument was it would be too expensive to actually remove it. But it's just not a really liable defence, let's be honest, with regards to that level of accountability and what you should be doing when you're holding data and what you're utilising that data for. So I just wanted to kind of round out. So where do we go from here? I talked about those kind of working groups and those type of things. So we have a working committee that's very much focused around ethics, those principles of privacy, security, inclusiveness, understanding about the human and technology interface with a lot of these things, but also about the governance and the roles and responsibilities, key concepts, what guidance that we can provide to developers and companies, other technology providers about some of these principles and how they should counteract them. But this, really the key to all of this is really understanding the sensitive use cases, so where there is some consequential impact. So if the decisions being made affects their ability to get housing or insurance or bank accounts, the risk of physical harm. So this could be where it's being utilized for military purposes, safety, manufacturing, clinical decisions that are going wrong. Wrong decisions are being made, it then causes harm, but that threat to human rights as well. And that kind of human right part is so important to really what we're thinking about. And that responsible AI, human rights go hand in hand. And it's something that we've got to be really mindful of when we bring all of these things together. So I think there's probably a lot of area for debate, a lot of questions, I can imagine. I'm going to hand back now and just see what questions we have coming through. So hopefully it's given you some food for thought. I know when I was, we were putting the original report together and then just showing how this bias kind of comes through. And if we don't take positive action and deliberate action, it's just going to get worse, particularly when we're talking about that pace of change that we've been talking about. So, questions?
Great, thank you, Sarah.
Sorry.
David, or sorry, Dan, are you on the questions?
No, you go first. We'll take it in turns if you like.
No, I'm not doing it. You are and David.
Okay, I'll do the first one.
Okay.
This is from Peter. When will Microsoft cease disabling an account in Active Directory and move to deactivating it instead?
Sorry, can you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, it's about the language. When will Microsoft cease disabling an account in Active Directory and move to deactivating it instead?
I'm sorry, I'm struggling. I don't know if the person wants to come off mute, and I'm not sure how that relates to language. I'm sorry. If you could explain the question, that would be helpful.
Yes, Sarah, it's the use of disable versus...
Oh, disable. I thought you meant as in disabling the account. Apologies.
No.
But this is just a brilliant example, actually, isn't it? It's just how that can actually be misconstrued. So my apologies. I didn't quite understand the logic there. I don't have specific information with regards to that. So one of the links I am going to share with you is regards to the accessibility, some of the responsible AI, some of the things which have already been worked on, and some of the action that's being taken. So I can't talk specifically about different actions that are being taken, but there are lots of different works in progress with regards to when Microsoft takes, as I kind of mentioned, when Microsoft takes a decision to make a change, it's then looking at how do we elevate that and outwards for everybody's benefit. So it's really then trying to understand, making these decisions, but it's more about the empowerment as well. It's empowering that this is not, as I say, it's not the world according to Microsoft. It's not that we are just going to unilaterally make changes. It's enabling companies to be able to assess from their own perspective what changes may need to be made as well. So I think it's really a balancing act to a certain degree.
Okay, so the second question there was a suggestion that anecdotal examples of where the use of sort of particular terms sort of have an impact on an IT career, and we just Anonymous was wondering just if they have any sort of empirical evidence that is the case.
So this came about, one of the people that we interviewed, she's actually the head of security awareness at one of the banks, but she's actually also ex-GCHQ, where they've done a lot of analysis on behaviour in particular, but also with regards to the level of negativity that is placed into language and the context of language in particular. So she's done a lot of work in this particular, so some of that was from a GCHQ perspective, and some of this is with regards to people's perception with regards to the negativity of language and how that is actually utilized and how it actually turns people off. Now, that's what I'm saying people are the weakest link, you're repeat offenders, and just the negative language that we actually apply to a lot of these scenarios just increases that level of unconscious bias to a certain extent. And it was just that kind of that realization with regards to, if we want people to change and take positive action and see security and technology differently, we have to think about how the language we utilize contributes to that. Now, we have got some statistics in the report where we've shown about some of the business benefits of thinking about inclusivity, but I think as well we acknowledge that language in the discussion in relation to diversity and inclusivity is still a relatively new area, and it's something that we debated a lot about with regards to some of the words, some of the terminology. Are we overly emphasizing cybersecurity in particular? When there's so much other areas going on, and this is why we ended up actually going to a third-party review on the report itself, just to make sure, again, that the positioning of the paper, what we were trying to say, was going to be considered in a positive light with regards to that. We're not trying to demonize people, we're not trying to just sort of say, well, all of this is wrong, it's bad, we've got it, but it's trying to bring it to the forefront about, it's really about the unconscious biases, really, that the more you portray something as bad, it's very negative, and these kind of the language we utilize. And even from my perspective, I come from a business continuity background by trade, and people used to always say, well, if Sarah's on the floor, something bad must have happened. And they were talking about, it's the same sort of theory almost from a security perspective, that the first time you hear from security, something bad must have happened. I'm going to get told off for clicking the link, for doing these things, for not following policy, for these violations. And it was just then trying to sort of say, no, we've got to try and make sure that people see it from the positive angle, and just trying to, if we can make these incremental changes, it not just has a positive effect, as we said, on employees, it's then making it as a really positive place for people to want to work as well.
Okay, great. The next question is there a danger that we are encouraging or coaching people to be offended?
But to a certain extent, I think it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, which is that kind of the changing in social norms and behaviors. And a lot of this is bringing things to the forefront. So if we think about, just with regards to the type of conversations that we were having with diversity inclusion many years ago, when we were talking about, gender inclusion, different cultures and those type of things. And at that time, there was probably a level of sensitivity and bias. Why is this a thing? Why are people making such a big deal of it? And it's only when you bring it to the forefront and people then go, oh, I just didn't realize, I just didn't even think. And that is the problem with the unconscious bias element, is you don't know you're doing or saying something that may be offensive to someone else. And that's the thing. We have to then think about what our opinion is one thing. How we then, the perception of that to someone else, or how we want them to feel as a result of the actions that we're taking and what we want them to do with that, is something else. So it's not always about what we think. It's also, we've got to be thinking about just how society and cultures and all of the things that are coming to the forefront is changing, and just being cognizant of that. And therefore, how do we react to that? And even when we were writing the paper, and we've been talking about this, and this is internally to Microsoft and other partners as well, is no one really has all the answers. I think that's the key. Even when we're talking about some of the biases, some of the issues that are coming to the forefront with some of the technologies, the products that we're getting out there, the repercussions, we know that every time we bring a product out, the cyber criminals are counteracting it. They're reverse engineering it. So as much as we were saying, so as much as we try and do stuff for good, other people are trying to look to do the same thing for nefarious purposes. And I think to a certain degree, this is why we keep talking about that assume compromise perspective is so important to a lot of what we're talking about. So you've got to kind of assume that someone can get access, they can get to the data, they can reverse engineer it, they can do all these things. If that is the case, what is the worst they can do? And therefore, how do we counteract it? I mean, we're always playing this sort of cat and mouse game to a certain extent. But I think that the issue that's coming is it really just comes down to this rapid pace of change, and we can't keep up, and we can't rely on somebody telling us to do something. We have to take our own action, whether that's code of conduct, whether that's policies, whether that's just having these conversations, getting people to think differently. Maybe that's just this is really the start of what's to come, maybe.
So this question is sort of relates to what you've just been talking about. Has Microsoft thought about the sort of cyber criminal element holding a company's AI system for ransom by, for example, retraining it to be offensive or turning against its corpus owner in all its communications?
Yes, yeah, very much so. That's a big area of focus for us. So even in Microsoft itself, we use huge amounts of machine learning, data analytics, and that's looking to spot that anomalous behavior. But we've got to look for the false positives. We've got to understand it. But as we were sort of saying, is the cyber criminals are learning our defenses. So not just from a cybersecurity, but any one of these algorithms. And so therefore what they're trying to do is they're trying to manipulate the outcome of the algorithm and the decision making that comes out the back. So examples of that, they can flood it with information. They're trying to steal the algorithms, or they're trying to alter the algorithm itself. So this is a big area of focus from a cybersecurity perspective, and you can expect to see a lot more coming from Microsoft in this particular area. So it's almost like it's that auditing the algorithm and making sure we can trust that that algorithm or the machine learning, the machine learning phases, the outputs, none of that has been tampered with. It hasn't been flooded. Where's the data coming from? Is that data being poisoned in any way? So we're almost trying to have like an auditor, if that makes sense, an auditor of the machine learning capability and the output. So yeah, very much so. This is a big area of focus for cybersecurity, but also technology in general, about how do you get that sense of trustworthiness. And how do you protect the code ultimately, is what we're talking about to a certain extent.
Okay, the next question is from Nadja, and it's quite long. I wonder, how do we draw the line between changing language to represent all the different maps of the world versus understanding that our emotions clutter our judgments and our moods influence the way we process information?
I think this has a lot to do with getting people's opinion on different things, and this is why it's not a universal one-size-fits-all. Even when we were talking to a number of companies that contributed to the paper, so those who had international operations, they said, the opinion of so the institution could have been headquartered in the UK, and a lot of policies, processes, strategy might be delivered from the UK, but people's perception is different in a different countries. So even when we're talking about some of the tensions on race, for example, is different, very different in the US compared to the UK and others. And so you can't just have a policy that is set from head office and extrapolates outwards. I think you can have guiding principles, and this is the core really that we were trying to think about is the specific language, the specific culture, but bringing people into the conversation. It wasn't just, well, we think this, so therefore you must too. And it's thinking about, you know, where are those high priority areas. Now, if you think back to one of the things I highlighted, which was regarding those kind of tiers, and this might be a good example. You know, there might be some words, some language, some things which are just top priority. They're a given in terms of things that should be replaced or things that should be on the agenda for discussion, and things that maybe, well, no, they could be, it's up for debate. But I think maybe having that kind of tiering could be quite useful. But I think overall, it's, as we said, it's just a fascinating area, and it touches into the lives of everyone in different ways because of their cultures, their backgrounds, their perspectives, and you know, just. But I think that I think the core is then it's the language, it's the culture, the context of the word. How that context is being utilized and the perception of that from different people. But I think it's one of those things which will continue to evolve.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question, and this is, I'm afraid, Sarah, it's not directly related to your presentation, but the person is desperate to get your opinion, and it's I wonder what your views are on Meta and their futuristic approach to remote working and being present in various parts of the world.
Well, this is a key area, actually. So Microsoft identified this as the hybrid paradox. So just to put that into perspective, so Microsoft has 180,000 people, and we do different pulse surveys across the world to gauge how people are feeling and what do they want, what do they want to happen. And the interesting thing was there are just as many people that want to work remotely, and there's just as many people that want to go back to the office. So you can't say we're going all one way or all the other. You have to cater for all of those different needs. So, and it really kind of brought to the forefront that flexibility is so important to different people. And it's almost, you've got to be able to log on from any device, anywhere, at any time. And that's the challenge when we're thinking about accessibility, when we're thinking about how do we make sure that we're being inclusive to the experiences that people have. So how does the experience differ when you're collaborating on Teams, for example, versus in the office? And how can you have meaningful meetings and this different thing? So we are catering for the hybrid, meaning a bit of everything, in essence. And we're seeing, you know, there are different companies that have different perspectives. So some of them will say, you know, my policy is you're all back in, some of that, you know, or you're staying at home. This is the danger I feel when you're trying to sort of say to be too draconian, because the people themselves start to push back. And I think this is, we're in a really interesting environment with regards to, you know, really taking on board the people's perspective when we're putting together these policies and processes. And I think it used to be days of old where the company would set the policy, very rigid, very strict, And sometimes if you wanted to work from home 4 or 5 days a week, you had to put a very strong business case in for why. And I almost feel it's the other way round. I think, we've almost proven the point to with regards to the technology is capable of doing it. We've got the right processes. We've got all these, the technology is there. We've then got to think about the social parts of this, as making sure that we're not inadvertently excluding people. We've got to then think about people who are isolated, and how do we kind of look at all of these things combined. I think there's a real positive element to a lot of this, because we're opening up capability to people who arguably did not have the capability before, particularly with people who are living in remote areas. They couldn't commute to London or wherever. Maybe they didn't have access to a lot of these services. They wanted to work part-time. They wanted to work nights, not 9 till 5. The possibilities that are opening up with regards to hybrid working and what comes next, I think are amazing, really. But we've just got to think about, how does technology, the process, support those people in what they want to do.
Okay, that's great. Well, I'm afraid that's all the questions we've got time for today. So I'm going to hand back to Darlin. And Darlin, there you go.
Yeah. Hi. Hello. Great. Well, that was really super. And your closing note was particularly relevant, Sarah, in terms of technology coping with people and adapting for people and so on. And this is what has been so fascinating about this evening. We talked about so many aspects of that and really giving us a lot of food for thought, as usual. Now, as far as all of this is concerned, obviously it's going to evolve. And we look forward to being on that journey with you. So I'd just like to say again, Sarah, thank you very much for a super session. And
Thank
I
you very
hope,
much.
Great. Well, you probably realize that I'm going to try to twist your arm to continue to give us the benefits of your skills and knowledge in the future, but that's a separate discussion. Tonight, thank you very much, Sarah, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today.
Great. And by the way, let me just encourage you to keep in touch with our future sessions. And we've got some fabulous ones coming up, haven't we? Have we? I think so. Let's see. Well, we have got something really, truly fascinating on the 7th of December, and that is our AGM. So I know you'll love to see that. So do rush and sign up for our AGM. That's actually the North London branch AGM. We've done the London Central one already. We've only got the NLB one left. So please come and join us for the NLB AGM, and we'll be looking back at the year or the past 12 months and talking about some of the fabulous sessions. And you'll be surprised to hear they're not all Sarah, although Sarah does feature quite a lot in them. We've had some brilliant sessions. And coming up, we've got lots more brilliant ones, of course. And for example, this one that's on the 9th of December, in just a few days' time. This one is part of our initiative on innovation hubs in London, of which we thought there must be 5, 10, 15, 20. I think we know of between 30 and 50 innovation hubs in and around London. So we've been linking up with some of them. And this is the first collaborative webinar or event that's coming out of it, run by our colleague, Kate Marshall. And you can see that the topic is smart cities. Are we being too smart for smart cities? There's an interesting question. Are we talking about AI? Are we talking simply about the capabilities that we have and that we're expecting from smart cities? Are we talking about how to make them more inclusive, resilient, sustainable, or some of all of those things? Come and join us at this super session on Thursday, the 9th of September, the 9th of December. And don't forget the insufferable excitement of joining us for our AGM on the 7th as well. We look forward to seeing you again soon as we head towards Christmas. So yo ho ho and ho 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 or whatever. Have a great time. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.